My name is Mary. I'm 40 years old, and I have 2 wonderful children. My husband, John, is 45. We've been married for 18 years. When I think back to the day we got married, I remember feeling joy, pure joy. I believed I was starting a beautiful journey with someone who loved me. John used to smile often. He had this way of looking at me that made me feel special. He said, "I love you," almost every day in the early years, and each time he said it, I believed him. There was no reason not to. I trusted him with my whole heart. I dreamed of a happy family, a warm home, children laughing, and growing old together. That's all I wanted. 2 years into our marriage, we had our first child, a little boy we named Adam. He was curious from the very beginning, always reaching for things, always watching, and soon, always laughing. He had a light inside him, and even now, that hasn't changed. 2 years later, we had Lily, our daughter. She came into the world so gently, and from her earliest days, she loved music. She would hum to herself before she could even speak. Lily is kind in a way that feels natural, like she was born knowing how to love. My life at that point felt full. I stayed at home to care for the children. I cooked meals with love, cleaned the house, taught them their ABCs, kissed every scraped knee, and sang lullabies before bed. John worked hard. He brought home the money we needed, and for a while, I believed we were a team. But slowly, things began to change. At first, it was subtle. John began working late. He started taking trips, business trips, he called them. But he rarely told me where he was going. I'd ask gently, not trying to pry, just wanting to understand, wanting to stay close to him. But he would brush me off. "I work for this family," he'd say. "Don't ask me questions." His tone was different, distant, sharp. I was hurt, but I stayed silent. I kept telling myself he was tired, that he was under pressure. I convinced myself he still loved me, deep down. I clung to the hope that the man I married was still somewhere inside him, and that one day he would return to me. Because I loved him. Then, 7 years ago, something happened that shattered that quiet hope. John left on one of his trips, and I was cleaning up the bedroom. That's when I found them. 2 plane tickets. I don't even remember exactly what I was looking for. It was probably something simple, like a pair of socks. But instead, I found a small envelope tucked under a pile of papers, and inside it, 2 tickets. One had John's name, the other, a woman's name I didn't know. My hands started shaking. My heart dropped. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room. I sat on the floor, clutching the envelope, and cried. Not for a minute or an hour, but for 3 whole days. I barely ate. I barely slept. I just cried. When John returned, I asked him who she was. I showed him the tickets, my hands trembling. He didn't even flinch. He said, "She's nobody. Don't worry about it." But how could I not worry? How could I believe that? The tickets said otherwise. Still, I said, "Okay." I swallowed my pride, my hurt, and all the doubts. I told myself I was doing it for my children. Adam was just 3 years old at the time. He was still learning to speak in full sentences. I didn't want to destroy his world. I didn't want to be the reason our home turned cold. So, I pretended. I smiled when I didn't feel like smiling. I made breakfast, lunch, and dinner like nothing had changed. But inside, everything had. Over the years, John remained distant. The late nights continued. The unexplained trips didn't stop. I knew in my heart that he was still seeing her. He never admitted it, but I could feel it in the way he looked through me instead of at me, in the way he didn't touch my hand anymore, in the silence that grew between us like a wall. My heart started to harden. I became numb. I still cleaned the house, but it didn't feel like home. I cooked meals, but I found no joy in them. I sat across from him at dinner and felt like I was dining with a stranger. Then one day, something unexpected happened. I ran into someone from my past, Alex. We had been friends many years ago, before John, before all of this. I saw him outside a cafe, helping his wife into the car. He opened the door for her, gently took her hand, smiled at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. It was such a simple act, but it struck me. I stood there, frozen. That was love. That was care. That was something I hadn't felt in years. Soon after, Alex and I began to talk again. It started with small conversations, memories of school, of childhood places. He asked me how I was, and I said, I'm fine. But I wasn't. I hadn't been fine for years, he could tell. And instead of brushing it off, he listened, really listened. He said to me, Mary, you are important. You are strong. I felt alive. We didn't need grand gestures. I didn't want diamonds or expensive gifts. All I wanted was connection. I wanted kindness. I wanted to feel like I mattered. For 3 months, we talked, just talked. And in that time, I laughed more than I had in years. I smiled in ways I had forgotten I could. But then, John found out. He was furious. He shouted. He asked me why, and I told him, with tears in my eyes, because I needed love. We argued for hours. Then we talked. Long, emotional conversations that neither of us had had in years. John cried. He said he loved me. He said, please don't leave. And I asked him, why now? Why after 18 years? He looked at me and said, I didn't know you were hurting. I didn't know what to believe anymore. My heart had been broken so many times, it barely held its shape. Then, one night, I got very sick. I had to be taken to the hospital. It was sudden, and I was scared. I remember lying in that hospital bed, pale and weak, hooked up to machines, wondering if I'd be okay. John stayed with me. He sat by my side and didn't leave. He held my hand all night. At one point, he looked at me and said, don't leave me. I love you. That was only the second time in 18 years I had heard those words from him with such emotion. And for a moment, a small part of my heart softened. I began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was still something there to hold on to. Something worth fighting for. Now, John is back home. He sleeps beside me every night. But in the quiet moments, when the lights are off and the world is still, I still feel the weight of everything we've been through. I can't pretend I don't know the other woman is still out there, likely waiting for him. I don't know what he tells her. I don't know if he ever truly ended it. And honestly, I don't know what the future holds. What I do know is that my heart is tired. I want to believe him. I want to trust him again. But trust, once broken, is not easily repaired. I try to smile for my children. I try to be strong. They deserve a mother who can carry them through life with grace and love, even when her own heart is aching. I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes. But all I ever truly wanted was to feel loved. Fully, honestly, completely. There are days when I stare at the ceiling long after everyone else has gone to bed. My mind is flooded with questions that don't have easy answers. Should I stay? Should I leave? What is best for my children? what is best for me. I try to listen to my heart, but it feels like it's speaking in riddles. In the weeks that followed, I noticed something different in John. Maybe it was the hospital scare. Maybe it was the confrontation we had after he found out about Alex. Or maybe, just maybe, he had finally opened his eyes. He started staying home more. The long trips stopped, at least for a while. He came home earlier, sometimes with groceries or a dessert the kids liked. He'd ask, "Do you need help?" And without realizing it, I would nod. Sometimes he'd wash the dishes. Other times he'd take out the trash or sweep the porch. These were small things, tiny gestures, but after years of silence and distance, they stood out. Still, my heart was guarded. I saw the effort, but the damage had already left a mark. It's like when you drop a glass and glue it back together, the shape is still there, but it's never quite the same. I appreciated what John was trying to do, but I couldn't feel the warmth I used to. When I looked at him, I didn't see the young man I married anymore. I saw someone who had made me feel invisible for years. Someone who broke the sacred trust between us. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe in us. But trust isn't something that grows back overnight. One evening, I sat down with Adam and Lily at dinner. We had cooked spaghetti together, something simple and fun. They were laughing, joking about school, telling me about their teachers and friends. For a moment, it felt normal, just a happy family sitting around the table. I watched their faces, the way their eyes sparkled when they laughed. And then I thought, how much do they know? How much do they feel without even understanding? After dinner, I turned to Adam and asked, "Do you think Daddy and I are happy?" He looked at me, wide-eyed, as if I had asked him something out of place. "I don't know, Mom," he said slowly. "You're always kind to each other, but sometimes it feels like you're sad." My heart dropped. He had noticed. I thought I was hiding it well. I smiled for them, read them bedtime stories, made them breakfast each day. But children see through more than we realize. Then Lily, my sweet little girl, looked up and said, "Mom, I just want us to stay together. I don't want anything to change." That moment broke me. Their words were so innocent, but they hit hard. I didn't want to hurt them. That's why I had stayed for so long, even when I felt empty. But I also couldn't keep pretending for something had to give. I needed clarity. I needed peace, not just for them, but for me too. A few days later, I made a decision. I went to see Alex. We hadn't spoken since everything came to light. I didn't go to rekindle anything. I just needed to close that chapter. When I saw him, he smiled kindly, just like he always had. There was no anger, no judgment. He asked, "How are you?" And for the first time in a while, I didn't say, "I'm fine." I said, "I'm trying to fix my life." He nodded with understanding. "You're strong, Mary," he said. "I know you'll find your way." I thanked him, not just for his words, but for the light he had brought back into my life during a time I felt completely invisible. I told him, "You reminded me that I matter." Then I turned and walked away. I knew it would be the last time I'd see him, and that was okay. Some people come into your life for a season to teach you, to show you something you've forgotten. Alex reminded me that I deserved love, care, and to be seen. That was his purpose in my story. That evening, I sat down with John. I told him it was time to be completely honest. "Do you want this marriage to work?" I asked him directly. He looked at me, quiet for a while, then said, "Yes, I want us to stay together. I made mistakes. I know that, but I still love you." I wasn't ready to fall into his arms. I didn't respond with affection. I asked him the question I'd been holding on to for years. "Can you leave the other woman? Can you give me the love and care I need? Not just now, while you're scared to lose me, but always?" He looked down, then back at me, and said, "I will try." I shook my head. "Trying isn't enough," I said softly. "I need you to mean it. I need you to act on it. I need to feel it." From that point, things began to change, slowly. We started taking walks together again, something we hadn't done in over a decade. We didn't talk about heavy things all the time. Sometimes it was just about the weather, or what Lily said that made us laugh. We talked like friends do. It wasn't grand. It wasn't romantic. But it was something. And yet, my heart was cautious. Forgiving John was, without question, the hardest thing I've ever had to do. I carried so much pain inside me. I thought about the long nights I cried quietly in our bed while he was away. I thought about the cold dinners, the silence, the questions that were never answered. I thought about the moment I held that plane ticket in my hand and saw Lisa's name. That name still haunts me sometimes. I don't even know what she looks like, but I've imagined her more than I've wanted to. But then, I thought about my own choices too. I thought about Alex, not with regret, but with reflection. I thought about the days I found joy in someone else's words. I knew I wasn't perfect either. That's when I realized that if I wanted peace, I had to stop holding on to every shard of anger. I had to put some of the pain down. Not for John's sake, but for my own. I needed to breathe again. One morning, I stood in front of the mirror. I looked at myself, really looked, not just at my face, but into my own eyes. I saw a woman who had endured so much, a woman who had been overlooked, hurt, and nearly forgotten. But I also saw a woman who had survived, who had kept her family together, who had raised two beautiful, kind, smart children, who had found her voice again. I whispered to myself, "Mary, you are not perfect, but you're strong." That was the moment I decided to forgive, not just John, but myself. I let go of the shame, the guilt, the resentment. I still carried the memories, but I no longer let them define me. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It meant choosing to move forward without the weight of yesterday crushing me. Now, I take life one day at a time. I don't pretend things are perfect. John and I are still together, but we're not the same people we were 18 years ago. He says he loves me more often now. He touches my hand when we walk. He listens better. But there's still a distance, a quiet shadow between us that I'm not sure will ever fully fade. And maybe that's okay. I focus on my children. They are growing fast. Adam is already becoming a teenager with his own thoughts and ideas. Lily still sings every morning. I want them to grow up in a home where they see strength, love, and honesty. I try to smile for them, even on days when my heart feels heavy. I want them to know that love takes work, and sometimes love means choosing yourself too. And I've started focusing on me. For the first time in years, I'm allowing myself to explore who I am outside of being a wife and mother. I started reading books again, stories of women finding themselves, healing, rising. I go for walks alone. I breathe deeply. I sit in silence. I journal my thoughts without editing them. Slowly, gently, I'm learning to love myself again. One evening, after the kids were in bed and John had fallen asleep on the couch, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote a letter. Not to anyone else, just to me. It said, "Dear Mary, you're strong, you're kind, you're important. Life is hard, but you've made it this far. You've survived heartbreak and disappointment. You've held others up even when you were falling apart inside. Remember, love yourself first, truly, deeply, because you deserve happiness. Don't forget that. Ever." I folded the letter and placed it in my drawer, and now, on the days when I feel small, when my chest aches from old wounds, I take it out and read it. It reminds me that I'm not alone, that I'm not broken, and that I am worthy of the life I want to live. This chapter of my life taught me so much. I've learned that love isn't just words, it's actions. It's showing up, it's being present, it's listening and caring. I've learned that people make mistakes, terrible ones, but they can also grow. Most of all, I've learned that I am capable of healing. I can feel sadness and still smile. I can carry pain and still love. I can walk through darkness and still seek light. As the days turned into months, life began to feel more settled, though never quite the same. There was a quiet rhythm to everything now. Mornings filled with school drop-offs and breakfast routines, evenings with homework and soft conversations. On the surface, it looked like everything had returned to normal, but I knew that underneath it all, the wounds were still healing. Some had scarred, others remained open, waiting for time or truth to mend them. John was different, that much I could say. Not drastically, not in the way movies or novels portray a man turning his life around overnight, but subtly, quietly. He was present. He looked me in the eyes when I spoke. He didn't brush off my feelings anymore, even when he didn't know what to say. Sometimes we would sit together without speaking, just sipping tea or folding laundry side by side. And in those moments, I began to understand that healing wasn't always loud. Sometimes healing was just staying, choosing to be there again and again, even when it's uncomfortable. But the truth? My heart still carried questions. I didn't ask about the other woman anymore, though I often wondered. Was she still out there, waiting? Did he miss her? Did he compare us? I didn't voice these thoughts aloud, but they followed me like shadows. They lingered in the quiet moments, in the empty spaces between his words. It's not that I didn't want to trust him. I just didn't know how to stop protecting myself. It had become a habit, a survival mechanism. There were nights I couldn't sleep, lying beside him, his breathing steady and calm while my mind spiraled. I would stare at the ceiling, remembering everything: our wedding day, the birth of our children, the silent years, the betrayal, and then Alex. Sometimes I asked myself, had I truly forgiven John? Or had I just pushed my pain so deep that I couldn't feel it anymore? And then there were the children. They were my light, my reason. Watching them grow reminded me daily that time doesn't pause for heartbreak. Adam became more independent, asking deeper questions, sometimes watching me with eyes that felt older than his years. Lily still sang, still danced, still filled the house with music. But she had grown quieter in other ways, like she was sensing the emotional weight I tried so hard to hide. One afternoon, as I helped her with homework, she asked, "Mom, do you ever feel sad even when you're smiling?" I looked at her, stunned. I nodded slowly. "Yes, sweetheart. Sometimes I do." She looked down at her paper and said, "Me too. sometimes. I wanted to cry, but instead I reached over and hugged her tightly. That was when I realized pretending wasn't helping anyone. Not me. Not them. So I began to share more. Not everything, not the full history, but just enough for them to see that adults also have feelings that are hard to talk about. I wanted them to know it's okay to ask for help, to feel confused, to feel pain, and still move forward. I began telling them little things about the hard days, about the moments when I felt scared or unsure, and in return, they opened up more too. We became closer, not because everything was perfect, but because we allowed space for honesty. I also gave myself permission to keep healing. I started writing again, at first just in my journal, thoughts, memories, hopes, then poems, small reflections about love, resilience, and what it means to rediscover yourself after losing parts of who you once were. I wrote in the early mornings, before the house woke up, with a cup of tea and the silence of dawn wrapping around me like a blanket. It became my therapy, my sanctuary. One day, I wrote a piece titled "The Woman in the Mirror." It wasn't about John. It was about the woman who had learned to stand on her own 2 feet again, even while still holding hands with uncertainty. I didn't share it with anyone. It was just for me. But when I finished reading it back to myself, I cried. Not because I was sad, but because I felt proud. I had made it through something so dark, and I was still standing. John noticed the change. "You seem lighter," he said one evening as we were putting away groceries. I looked at him, smiled faintly, and said, "I'm just learning how to carry things differently." We continued to rebuild, not just our marriage, but our friendship. We laughed more, sometimes about old memories, sometimes about the kids. We went out to dinner once a month, something simple, but it felt meaningful. We didn't avoid the past anymore. Occasionally, we would talk about what happened, not to reopen wounds, but to acknowledge that they were part of our story. That felt important. Still, I had moments where I questioned everything. Should I have left? Should I have chosen a new life, like so many people do? What would life have looked like if I had walked away instead of fighting to stay? But then I reminded myself, every choice comes with its own cost. There is no perfect decision, only the one that aligns most with your truth. And for me,